And if there's anything that's going to sort of move Tory MPs to possibly oust their Prime Minister, it is the fear that they will lose a general election and lose their seat. Hi, my name is George Grylls. I'm a political reporter at the Times, and these are the biggest risks that could bring Liz Truss down. So I'd say polling and then tax cuts are right up there. Given the sort of calamitous fallout of the mini budget, the picture in the polls for the Tories ever since has been pretty dire. Consecutive polls for the Times have shown that Liz Truss is about 30 points behind. Now, if that was replicated at an election, that would mean the Tories would be lucky to elect a handful of MPs. And if there's anything that's going to sort of move Tory MPs to possibly oust their Prime Minister, it is the fear that they will lose a general election and lose their seats. So I would say that is by far and away the most dangerous thing facing Liz Truss at the moment. I'd say coupled with that, the main issue facing her is her tax cuts. So as part of the mini budget, she staked her leadership on this dash for growth, which involves a belief that if you cut taxes, that will mean people have more disposable income to spend, and that will get the economy going, and that will be a good thing for Britain. The problem is the markets didn't quite see it that way. And if the pound continues to slump against the dollar, if the borrowing costs for the government, so if it becomes more expensive for the government to borrow, then she faces a very unenviable task of choosing between spending cuts on the one hand, or reversing some of those tax cuts, so effectively raising taxes. If she does have to raise taxes, that is effectively a confidence issue, because the budget is a confidence issue, and would be a humiliating U-turn within weeks of going to number 10. And after that, you've got this sort of problem she has in the Tory party of dangerous ex-ministers on the backbenches. So after 12 years in power, the Tories naturally come to that point where there are lots of senior figures within the party who now no longer have positions of power, who are kind of kicking their heels and thinking, well, what's there for me to do? And they're, as we saw with Michael Gove, who was removed from cabinet in the dying days of Boris Johnson, he went to Tory party conference with an agenda. So you've got these scheming former ministers, not least of which is Boris Johnson himself, with many Tory MPs might eventually make a return, who are there and could very easily undermine Liz Truss's leadership. So I think managing them is the next risk. After that, deregulate planning reforms. This is an issue that's very close to Tory MPs' hearts. Boris Johnson failed to get planning reform through. If Liz Truss handles that badly, that's going to cause another nightmare for her. The next issue that I could also see a rebellion coming on easily is benefits. Boris Johnson promised to increase benefits in line with inflation. Liz Truss seemed to indicate that she'd prefer to do it in line with earnings. Tory MPs have already started to stand their ground, not least those in her cabinet, which brings me to the next issue, which is not just rebellious ex-ministers, rebellious current ministers, rebellious cabinet members. I mean, there have been after having appointed lots of people who she beat in the Tory leadership contest, so I think of Penny Mordaunt and Kemi Badenoch, there hasn't been that message discipline within the cabinet already. So the Prime Minister has to maintain order over the cabinet, and already you're seeing ministers not exactly being publicly loyal, and that is a challenge, because if you have leaders in waiting, that's another problem for her. Going down the list, we also have immigration. Remember, the Tory party put it front and centre in their 2019 election campaign, and they have struggled to bring the number of small boats crossing the Channel down, and they now have a Home Secretary in Suella Braverman who is dead set on sort of taking a tough line on immigration, but that goes against Liz Truss's own growth agenda, and there are signs she wants to relax certain visa rules on immigration. So the fact that there is this tension in the party between the growth and increasing immigration and what has been promised on reducing immigration, that is another problem that she'll have to balance. And then we come to the ongoing situation in Northern Ireland, the Northern Ireland Protocol. Liz Truss has a tightrope to walk there, because basically power sharing, so the government in Northern Ireland has collapsed because the DUP refused to go in it because of this Northern Ireland Protocol, which was an agreement with the EU to sort of manage the flow of goods, post-Brexit. They think that it basically undermines the union in Northern Ireland. So she has them on the one hand, but the EU on the other hand, who are saying, well, you can't just override this agreement that we already signed. So they're threatening possible sort of trade, or even a full-blown trade war if she were to get rid of that. So she has to deal with the unionists on one side in Northern Ireland, the EU on the other, and somehow negotiate that. I think I'm going to the end of this. Yeah, I think I've just got one more. And that is, yes, misconduct allegations. So I think she learnt the lesson of the Chris Pincher scandal, which eventually brought down Boris Johnson by sort of reacting. She'd rather go too hard than too soft on Conor Burns, who was accused of misconduct allegations, which he denies. And she decided to remove the whip from him and sack him as a minister. She seems to have dealt with that pretty well, drawn a line under it, but the history of the past couple of years in the Conservative Party, unfortunately, is that we're never far away from another misconduct allegation. So these are the sort of events that can come out of nowhere and suddenly sort of torpedo your premiership. So I think that rounds off the 10.